Hey, Rabia, I'm wondering if you could help me out with something. There's
Yeah.
this problem that I keep seeing in different Teams apps, particularly in tabs. Do you mind taking a look?
Yeah, of course. Let's do it.
Yeah, so this seems to come up a lot that people will have an app and
Hmm.
you have to log into the app to get some data. So this is just a really simple one. Notice
Yep.
there's a pop-up. This is a really simple one that just shows some email using the Microsoft Graph. So I
Yep.
know I know everybody out there probably already knows that you have to log in from
Yep.
your app and not just from Teams to get to call the graph. Here's the problem, right? If I leave here and go away and then I come back, um, I have to log in again every time, and it's
Oh,
kind of annoying. And I have to click this button,
okay.
and I kind of get that, it's going to pop up, so I need to click the button to do a pop up because browser
Oh,
rules and all, but it's just so
that.
obnoxious, right? Like every time I'm doing something, I'm kind of having to
Hmm.
come back and log in again.
Yeah.
So,
And it's not like you're gonna stay in that forever. Of course, you got to do other stuff in Teams, or you got to go to another website. So it keeps on popping up. Although I noticed that you're not actually putting your user ID and password in, but still that pop-up is super annoying.
right. Yeah, I had to put it in the first time, and it even asked
Hmm.
me for consent, to
Right.
consent to the permission the first time. And now
Hmm.
it's remembering, like the login prompt is remembering that I'm logged in and it's remembering that I've
Hmm.
consented, but I
Right.
still see the darn pop-up. This pop-up is so annoying.
That
And
is. And that's probably why we're here. We're going to discuss something called SSO for Teams. And that's what we're going to decode today.
welcome everybody to another episode of Microsoft 365 Code Decode. This single sign-on thing seems to have a lot of different meanings to different people. I mean, sometimes it just means that I log in always with the same username password, and I did that. Sometimes
Yep.
it means I can log in with without having to re-enter my username and password. Technically, the app I just showed did that too, but it's still annoying. I think what I
Yeah.
want is a level of single sign-on that's completely transparent. In fact, I think you used a term silent authentication.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
how can we make that happen inside of Teams?
Yeah, it's a good point because, yeah, you're really confused most of the time on what single sign-on means to you. And what we're going to decode here today is the single sign-on for Teams tab. But before we jump into that, I think we need to have a generic idea of what single sign-on is. So let's go to this small diagram that can show you what single
Okay.
sign-on is. All right, so what basically happens here is Bob logged in, or whoever logged in, and
Yep.
asked the application whether they could use the application using these credentials. And the application, what it does is it's tied to an identity provider, where the application will go ahead and ask the identity provider whether to let him or her in.
Right.
And the identity provider, what it does first is check whether this application is registered with them, and then check the credentials. And once it's all done, then it says, okay, log him or log her in.
Hmm.
And that's how the user will be logging into the application. That's done. So your credentials sent, everything is done, all good. Now another application. So the user is again trying to log into this application, where this application is also registered with the same identity provider. In
Right.
this case, the application again goes and checks with the identity provider, and identity provider again asks, "Who are you?" Like, application, who are you?
Right.
And then sees that it is registered, and it also sees that, oh, okay, so this person has logged in before. We did some trick where we remember this person logged in, and it says that, okay, let her in, and that application, without prompting for credentials, would log that person in. So this is generally what it means to have a single sign-on in your application.
Right. And just to clarify, right, the first one, the purple one, appropriately, is Teams,
Yep,
right? And then the red one is my app. Is that right?
correct. That's right.
Because they're different apps. I mean, the user thinks it's just one thing, probably,
Exactly.
but for us geeks here in the room, we all know that my app is not from Microsoft. It's from me, and it's not Teams. It's something else. So it doesn't. Even if the user has logged into Teams, they haven't necessarily logged into my app.
Yep. Now we're going to discuss what SSO is for Teams tabs.
Great.
So we have a Teams application client code, and there is a Teams application server-side code. So client code would basically get a token from the Teams SDK. And that token is now given to the server-side code.
Right.
And the server-side code, what it does is it goes ahead and asks the identity provider to get an access token with the permissions that this app needs to show the data from a service. In our case, let's say the service provider is Microsoft Graph. In that case, the identity provider does all the checking, whether the registration is done, same thing that we discussed earlier. It would check the identity of the person and the permissions and the scopes that this person needs or this application needs, and it will give the access token back to the server-side code. Now, this is called the token exchange. And once this token is exchanged, this access token can be used to get the data from the service provider, again, in our case, Microsoft Graph, to get the data back. And this data is now sent back to the Teams app client.
Got it. So basically the idea is that I'm getting a token from the Teams SDK, and it's sort of a generic token, like I can't use it to call the graph, but then I need to implement a server side of my app to do that, to do the to swap
exchange
that for a proper. Got it. Okay.
Yep.
So that sounds really useful. How does that? Do you have like an example of that you can show me?
Absolutely. So we have a very basic sample that will show you this token exchange. And Bob, let's also show the tokens that we discussed, the token that we get from Teams, which you said, have very basic information of the user. And then we also would show the access token, how we get this exchange, etc. So let's go to the demo now. So what you'll need to do to enable SSO in your Teams tab is basically three things. So you have the Azure AD app registration. Remember how we discussed about the application talks to the IDP, which is the Azure AD, and checks, whether registered and stuff like that. So that's where this comes in. So Azure AD app registration, which I will walk you through. And then there is the manifest updates based on whatever we registered. We need to make sure that the Teams tab, which Teams application, which is a package that has manifest and two icons. So this manifest file needs to have some sort of an information that points to whatever registration we did. Also the access token exchange, which we will be showing you a detailed demo. So this is the app registration that I already done. I created the application with the name. After I've created the name, what I did was I chose the multi-tenant support type. So maybe I'll just show you quickly on how I did that. And then we'll come to the application. So in Azure Act, you go to the portal.azure.com, which is your Azure portal. Go to Azure Active Directory, and you go to app registration, and you click on new app registration. And you go ahead and fill in the information here. So you have got the name, you choose multi-tenant, and then you go ahead and register. And that's what I've done in the first step. Okay. So once that is registered, let me just go ahead and search for my app here. Okay. So this is the app that I already registered to save time. I went straight ahead into expose an API part, and I added a scope, which then gave me the application ID URI, which basically is API / the app ID first. What I did extra was I added the subdomain wherever my tab is hosted. So this is how I created this application ID URI. And then once that was created, I added the scope, which basically is like a form that opens up, and I call my scope name. Remember how when you open up the token, you can actually see the scope name. So this is the
Right.
scope name that we give.
Okay.
And then we choose who can consent, which basically is admins and users. And then you basically give display name and description. Make sure it's enabled.
So this is the scope that Teams uses when it gives you that first token.
Yes, exactly. But you still have to do a few more things. You need to authorize your Teams mobile application. And what was this one again? I forgot.
Yeah, the one is the desktop app, and the other one is the
mobile ones. Yeah, so exactly. So you need to make sure that these client applications are able to use it, because once you set the SSO in your application and you've logged in using your desktop, then you should not have that window where you put credential in for your mobile. So that's what we're trying to do here. Once this part is over, you go ahead and add the permissions you need. And Bob, I think you're going to go into detail about the permissions and the scopes, because we are currently going to do a simpler version just to show the token exchange. We're going to pre-consent these scopes, right?
You can see it says granted in the status field, and that's because you must have clicked that check grant admin consent button up at the top of kind of the middle of the screen there, that green checkbox.
Yeah. And I added a bunch of scopes. User.read was already there by default. They're all delegated permission for the user, and they're all graph. So that's what we're seeing here, which is our service provider. So I'll go to, once the permission part is done, I'll go to overview, because we need to copy a bunch of things. We need the client ID and the secret. Client ID basically is the application ID here. So you can copy that. And what your certificate, your secret is, you need to come to certificates and secret and set your secret. And one thing I would say is, once you have the secret here in this window, copy that, save it somewhere secure, because once you come back, you won't be able to see the secret anymore. So
cool. So I think you said some of this information now goes into the app manifest, the Teams app manifest?
Yes. So that's the next step. So we've done all this, but Teams is still clueless about what's happening because it doesn't know all this information. So how do we pass that information to Teams? And Teams only reads stuff using its manifest. It's like very picky. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code and see the manifest file here in my project. So we've got all the details that we need. And if you want to learn more about manifest, go to our older video where we're explaining all the Teams application stuff, where we've talked about the manifest magic. So this is pretty useful. So the one thing you need to add for your application to have Teams SSO is to put this information in the web application info. So this basically is your app ID, that the app that you just registered in your Azure portal, the ID, and then the application URI. Remember, there was a URI API / the domain / the ID. So this is what you need to put in for your Teams client to know that your app is single sign-on ready.
I see. So that's what's going to allow that first call, the local call in Teams, to give you that first token.
That's right.
Okay, cool.
Cool. So I've got this project here, which basically has a HTML file here. As you can see, this is our client-side code that we discussed before, which has the SDK, Teams SDK, and also it goes ahead and gets a token from Teams. So this is what we discussed earlier. So we get a token in the client application code, and then we exchange it in the server-side code. Now, for the server-side code, we have this index.js file. Your token that we get from the Teams is exchanged for the access token, and this is where it all happens. So this request.query.token is actually the token that you get from the SDK.
So it's making a REST service call directly to Azure AD there at login.microsoftonline.com, right?
That's right. And you can see here client ID and client secret. And what this is basically is, earlier we showed you the Azure AD app registration that we did. And we have the app ID and the secret from there. And that's what we're going to pass in here. And the token is the token that we got. And then this is the app scope, the scopes that you want for, what kind of data you are getting from Graph or whichever service provider. And Bob, we have this requested token use that says on behalf of, and also this grant tab. I'm not really sure of what that stands for.
Yeah, so, well, the grant type is just saying it's an OAuth request. You're asking for a JWT bearer token and using the OAuth protocol. And then requested token use is on behalf of. So you're passing in the old token that you got from Teams and then proving that you are the app because you have the client ID and secret. And then you're acting on behalf of the user based on the token that Teams had for that user.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's what they call overflow.
Right.
On behalf of flow.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. So, and then all we do is once we get that token back from Azure AD, then we just pass it back into our application. That's what we're doing here. So this is basically just to show the exchange of the token. Now let's see how that token looks like.
Okay, so there's the access token.
Yeah, so here's the access token in the Teams tab because I'm displaying it. But you can see here in this terminal that I'm displaying the tokens. Now, at first we have the ECPC token that we get from Teams. I call it ECPC token.
It is. It's so easy. I wish the whole thing was that easy, but auth is always complicated, right?
It is. You have no idea how much I screamed when I saw the access token coming back.
For happiness, right?
I know. I know. And I also printed the access token and I go, oh my heavens, because that's exactly how I felt when I got it back. And you can see here, both these tokens are different. And I have no idea what's in it though.
Well, let's take a look.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. We can go to jwt.ms and it will parse that out for us.
Well, Bob always has a plan. What is it called?
jwt.ms. There's another jwt.io, which does pretty much the same thing. And this is going to show something, which is that these tokens are not encrypted, right? So the fact is that you just pasted this into a random website, and I guess I wouldn't advise doing it to just a completely random one. That's why I like jwt.ms. I know I work for Microsoft. It comes from Microsoft. I know it's safe. But anyway, the point being that these are bearer tokens. It's kind of like a $20 bill. If you find one on the street, you can spend it. You don't, there's nothing, they're not going to check on who you are, whether it's your token. You just get to use it. So anyway, that's why you have to have HTTPS when you use this stuff, because anybody who might intercept the message, if it's not encrypted, the only thing that's encrypting it really is HTTPS. So anyway, but yeah, you can see it's broken the whole thing down for us.
Yeah, and it has got all this information, but it's really Russian to me at the moment, except for maybe the name. So it's like very basic information of a user.
Yeah, well, so some of the things to look at, right, are right up at the top, the audience, AUD. And I see that it's looking, the audience is your app, right? cda.ngrok.io is where your app is running. So you want to call Graph, which is why right out of the gate, this token is not going to work for Graph. It's only going to work when you call your app.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
That makes all sense, because earlier we showed in the app registration that we put this as the application URI.
Yep. And then I see your family name is admin. So you are so into being an admin that you changed your name legally to admin. And
of course.
We're gonna and then there's a bunch of other stuff here, that including a signature saying that this is all okay. There should be a scope somewhere, SCP access as user. So that's the permission.
There we go.
All you have permission to do is access as user. So that's the situation, is you've got a token for your own app. And I guess that kind of makes sense, because Teams is authorized to, when we did the app registration, you gave it permission to issue tokens for your app, but not for the graph or some other app.
That's right, which is why we have the access token. So let's go and decode that one as well. I'm going to open up my Visual Studio Code.
Okay.
And open up the access token that we got, which clearly looks different. I just checked the ending and I know that it's different. All right, so let's see the access token now, hey?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so, oh, look at that. So the audience now, you might think that's all zeros, but it's actually got some digits in there, like the 3 and stuff. That's the magic GUID for the graph, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. You're right.
Oh, there you
That's
go.
cool.
Okay. So we got that correct, and then they've got the scope is now different. So you've got you're getting email, OpenID, profile, and user.read.
Yeah.
For the graph. So user.read is the one that would allow you to read your user profile.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is looks all pretty good. So I think this look like it should work for the Microsoft Graph.
That's awesome. So we got the tokens, yay. And this is what basically Teams SSO is under the hood, like the basic stuff, right? So this is how we get the token without the user going in and doing a bunch of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. I wonder if we could go ahead and call the graph call right away using Postman or some other tool. So let's just go ahead and try that out now. All right, so I already set this up where I have a request, but I have not done anything else yet. So I know that I need to call HTTP. Is it me? Just me, not messages yet. It's me.
Okay. Yep.
And in the authorization, I'm just going to use my access token. So I choose bearer token and paste that token that we got. I'll adjust that a bit so you can see what I did there, and then hit send. That should just get me the data that I need, which is...
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Look at that.
There's
my
your
business phone.
There's your very binary looking phone number and your admin name, your new alter ego.
I knew that. My job title is null.
Oh, no. Does that mean you can get employment insurance?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Cool,
so
but
it's
at
working.
least, yeah, it's working. So I guess you get the idea. You can go ahead and call graph right away using this token with the permissions that it's granted you. So we're going to go ahead and go to our client code. And this is where we're printing it out, right? So we saw earlier that we're printing the access token in the tab. So maybe we can go ahead and, since we already have the access token, we could just go ahead and call graph, right?
Sure.
Oh, wait, Waldeck has something to tell.
You want to do what? No. Don't expose the token on the client. If you get a token on a server, keep it there. You don't want to expose a token from server to the client. That's just not the way it goes, right? So it's basically the same way as if you wouldn't share a password, right? The benefit you get if you get token on a server and keep it there is that when that token expires, you will be able to renew it there without having to do a round trip, right? Because otherwise you call server to get a token, put it on a client, then use it to call an API. That token expires, then you need to get back to the server, get another one. Don't. If you get a token on a server, keep it there.
So let's just go ahead and do the right thing, right? Let's go back to our server-side code, and where we are sending our token information back, we're just gonna delete that and paste our graph call.
I see. Right. So you've already got a web service. You might as well just do all the work down there and pass the result instead of passing this very sensitive data back.
Exactly. So the token is now safely in your server-side code that is hosted somewhere in the cloud, but it's not there in the browser for anyone to sniff it out.
Okay.
So I'm sending that data back, and let's just see it working one last time in the tab, which shows all the graph information that we saw earlier in Postman. Boop. Yes, we
All
got
right,
it.
look at that. That's great.
All right, so we saw the earlier sample. It was pre-consented, the scopes, etc. And we said that we promised our viewers that Bob would go ahead and show a real sample that you could leverage and use in enterprise level applications that would require this kind of consent.
Yeah, so it's very simple as well. So here's the app, and you can see I'm running it for the first time. So it says consent required. I click the button, and that's partly, the click the button part is to handle pop-up blockers. And here is the consent form. And you can see here that it says I could consent just for myself, or if I check this off for the whole organization. And I only see that because I'm an admin. So I'm just going to consent for myself. And then there we go. And it's just returning, same as yours, it's just returning the profile. The nice thing is, though, if I leave and come back, it's not gonna bother me with anything. It just comes right up. No interaction, no buttons, no pop-ups, nothing. Right? So
sorry, can I just say I just love your job title.
I'm going to work really hard to get to be a real chief
bottle washer.
My goal in life is to be the chief bottle washer. So anyways, so this is let me show you a couple of things I had to do. One was in the app registration, I had to add something. I had to add the ability to handle a pop-up. So we're going to use the old authentication if we can't get the token because it's authentication required. Or sorry, consent required. We're going to use the old authentication just once, and that will force the consent. So that's why I have these redirect URLs, which is really just because of a few different versions of the app that I'm using with the same registration. And then I just want to point this out. Implicit grant is not enabled. And so you'll see in the documentation, it says that you don't need implicit grant, but some of the tutorials still say implicit grant should be checked. And that goes back to an earlier version of Azure AD before they supported something called auth code PKCE flow, which is kind of an alphabet soup. So don't worry about it, but just letting you know, if you use this sample here, you do not need the implicit flow because we're going to take care of that in the code. So the code is here, and I've kind of structured it out quite a bit. Now that server side is here. This is the on behalf of flow, right? And it's very much like what you showed, except the difference is that when I get my response back, I'm going to check the status. And if it's not 200, and if the error is either invalid grant or interaction required, that's really telling me that Azure AD is basically saying, I need to talk to this person. It's kind of like, right? You ever go into a place and that you have to go talk to the manager? Oh no!
Oh
right?
my God!
It's kind of like that, right? And then I'm going to return that error back. In that case, you'll have to trust that my exception handling logic is going to return interaction required status back, as opposed to returning the actual token. And then inside of my server side, I'm not actually going to return the token the way Waldeck didn't want us to, right? So if I ask for the user profile, I'm going to go and get that server side token if I can. And if it needs interaction, it will throw an exception, which you just saw me do a throw in the other function. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to log that the interaction was required. And then what will happen is that the client side is going to pick up on that. So here's the client side code. The happy path is I got my client side token, I passed it to the web service, got my user profile, and I displayed it. That's the happy path. If I've got an error here, it's going to say, okay, if that error happens to be interaction required, then I'm going to show that button on the screen, right? And what that button is going to do is it's going to call this other SDK, Teams SDK, which is the weirdest one. This is the SDK call that launches a pop-up from Teams. It's called authentication.authenticate, but it doesn't actually do authentication at all. What it really does is it displays a pop-up.
Open up a pop-up, yeah.
And so that pop-up code is here under consent pop-up.
Sure.
And so by breaking this out, I got more code. So sorry about that. But then what is happening inside of that pop-up is, and I did this I just decided not to use MSAL or anything. Hopefully it makes it clearer for people. This is just doing it directly in the code. We're going to create a request for Azure AD with a tenant ID, and notice that we're using auth code flow and not implicit flow. So those other demos that require you to check the implicit flow box, they would have implicit here, but I have code, which is the auth code flow. I've got my scopes, and then I'm going to redirect. So the way Azure AD and OAuth works is that some things are handled with a web service call, like your on behalf of flow. Other things are handled with a redirect.
Right.
So I'm going to redirect over to Teams inside. I'm running inside the little pop-up now, and that gives Teams a chance. And that gives Azure AD a chance to interact with the user. So it can ask, it could do whatever it needs. In this case, it's going to be the consent.
Yep.
And it's going to send them back to popup end.html.
Yeah.
And popup end is going to be here. All it does is notify success, which goes back to my tab, passing it it doesn't even have anything to pass it, honestly. It's just, we're done. The consent is done. Because then what's going to happen is the tab's going to run again. It's going to run through all the same code that you saw before. Yeah. Except this time it's going to succeed because I've done the consent, right? And in fact, if I didn't do the consent, it will come back with the same error, and I will be asked again and again until I consent or give up, right? And so that's the whole thing.
That's amazing. And one thing I would say is I saw a tenant ID in that URL that you sent. Basically, that's what sends back like you said, it's all redirection, right? So if you if you're using a multi-tenanted app, you probably you don't have to send the tenant ID, right? You can replace it with common, and that would go ahead and open the pop-up in that way. Yeah,
so I registered my app as a single tenant, and that's why I had to do that. But you did the multi-tenant. So that's, again, we've got a whole video on how multi-tenant works so that people can watch that and figure out which one is appropriate for them.
Yes, but, go and have a look.
Yeah, there you go.
Awesome.
So
all right.
So that's the other demo, and we'll point people to the source code for both. Kind of the simple one, which is probably best if you know that the admin will have already consented. I like that yours is simpler, right? But then if you need to allow the user to consent, or even if you just want to prompt the admin inside the app instead of asking him or her to go to the Azure AD admin page, then you can do it using this other app that I've updated.
Honestly, I feel so light now. Like I was thinking, oh my God, it's so complicated, all these things. I mean, with us breaking up the sample into showing the token related stuff and then you showing the redirection part, I think now it breaks down a bit and it's more easier to follow. So
I hope so. Hopefully people leave us a comment in the comments and let us know if this helped, because I get that this is, I mean, you said you were screaming at one point. I know I definitely had more hair, when I pulled a little bit of it out trying to get this stuff to work the first time. So, I get it. I get that it's tricky, and I'm, we're really doing this for the developers to try to make it easier for them.
Yes, totally. Appreciate everyone watching this. Like Bob mentioned, put a comment and let us know what worked, what didn't work. And also, what is your take on SSO? Let us know.
That'd be great. And don't forget to like the video if you liked it, and to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos on Microsoft 365. And we'll see you on the next episode of Microsoft 365. Code Decode.
See ya.